Hi guys, so today's video is going to be a list of some books that maybe might have been better as standalones. Some of these I think, yes, they would have been better as standalones. Some of these I've seen other people say this. Either way, I'm going to kick the video off with the one that kind of was the inspiration for this video, and that would be the Cursebreaker series, aka A Curse So Dark and Lonely. This book is a bit of a booktube darling. When this book came out, everybody was losing it for it. I read it thinking, it's probably a little overhyped, but we'll see. And I ended up loving it. I thought it was fantastic. It's a Beauty and the Beast retelling, a portal fantasy. A girl from our world ends up in a fantasy world where there is a prince at the end of every season. If he does not have somebody fall in love with him, he ends up becoming this rage monster that he cannot control, and then he kills a bunch of people, and then the season starts over, and he really does not want to keep killing people. So that's the setup for the book. I really loved it. And then the second book, I was thinking, okay, maybe this just has middle book syndrome. The second book follows different characters, and I really didn't like those characters as much as the characters in the first one, but I was like, okay, well, we're focusing on some other people. That's fine. I don't like them as much, but it's okay. The third one probably will bring it home. And while I liked the third one, I thought it was fun. I thought it was cute. You know, it was good. But I think the first one was my favorite. And I kind of think we could have ended it after this first one. I don't mean to be a jerk. I don't say this with any authority whatsoever, but I would be very curious if there was intention all along that this was going to be a trilogy, or if it was like, I'm going to leave there some potential, basically. I'm going to leave some potential for other books, depending on how things go. That is something that happens sometimes in publishing, where the author wants to write more books, but the publishing industry needs to make sure, well, if your first one doesn't sell, we don't want to publish more. So they leave the first one where it could be by itself, or maybe there could be more. I don't know if that was the case here. This author had already had other books come out that were pretty successful, so I'm not sure, but either way, I think the first book was my favorite, and I definitely think we could have ended it there. The next one, I'm just going to get this one out of the way because it's in the thumbnail. You guys know it's coming. That would be Mistborn. This is one of the ones that I don't think I agree that it should have ended after the first one, but I do see a lot of people. There are two very, very separate camps. There are people who are like, this trilogy as a whole is absolutely amazing. Once you finish it, you will have a new appreciation for all of the small details that are laid out along the way. The first two feel kind of disjointed, like different stories. Then that third one, you're like, oh my gosh, it was his vision all along. And that would be my camp. That would be where I'm at. I think that the ending of this trilogy is phenomenal. My favorite trilogy, my favorite series ending. I think he knocked it out of the park. However, I have seen some people say, I wish that it had ended after the first book. I like the first book. I don't like the rest of it. I think it gets boring. I don't like the characters as much. I really hate the ending. And I die a little inside every time, but at the same time, I'm like, I kind of see it. I think a lot of you know what Mistborn is about, but if you don't, it follows a society where back 1,000 years ago, the Dark Lord won. That's kind of the pitch that you see on the front cover, I think, of the UK editions. And so we're 1,000 years into what would the society look like if the chosen one hadn't won and instead the bad guy won. Things aren't looking great, and we follow a merry band of misfits as they get together to pull off the ultimate heist and take out the Lord Ruler, the bad guy, and they're trying to basically free the oppressed from oppression. And there's this awesome magic system that involves ingesting metals. It's a great story. It's a classic heist story. It's a classic found family story. And I do enjoy this first one, but I read the first one and I was like, that was cool. I liked that book. I thought it was pretty good. Yeah, I liked it. Then I read the second one, and it was about halfway through the second one that I was like, no. Okay, what is this? This is like the best thing ever. I was so emotionally invested. I remember the exact moment. That I was like, this is it. This is what I like in books. I was driving my car. I was stuck in traffic, and I got to this part in the audiobook because I wasn't reading while driving. That would be reckless. And it got to this one part where I was like, no. And then the character was like doing the thing that I didn't want them to do. And I'm like, don't let them, no, don't. And then it happened, and I was like, ah. And then I had a very similar thing with the third one. This is just a play-by-play of how much I love the trilogy. This is not necessary. But anyway, I got to the end of the third one. I was like, I was a few minutes away from being done with the audiobook because I had once again been driving, and I pulled up. At the time I lived in an apartment, and I pulled up to my apartment, and I just like sat in the car, and I was like, I can't wait for this narrator to get through this. He's talking too slow. So I turned it off, and I like got my book out, and I read, and then I came inside, and I told my husband, I was like, I just finished the series. And then I was really sad, and I've continued to be sad. And some people don't feel the same, and I think that's crazy. But, you know, I get it, because some people pick up the second one and they don't have that moment like I had. And the first book, all on its own, is a great heist story. And I kind of get if you're like, I wanted it to just end after the first book. It definitely could have. Next up is a book that some of you probably maybe haven't heard of. It's not as talked about, and that would be Ever the Hunted. So the setup for this story is that we follow a character whose father has died, and she is told that the number one suspect for this murder would be her childhood best friend that she hasn't talked to in a long time. She happens to be the best tracker around, so they essentially hire her to go track down this killer who was her best friend growing up. And I quite liked the story. Actually, I thought it was fine. It was fun. I liked the couple in the story. I thought that the romance was one of those romances where even if there would start to be something a little annoying between the couple, then they would talk about it. And I was like, wow, what are the odds that people can talk through their problems? It's like magic. And so I really appreciated that, and I thought it was fun, cozy story. And then there was a sequel. And the end of the first one, there's kind of like a what reveal that I'm like, do we need that though? And then I was like, well, you know, I'll read the next one. And I didn't think we needed it. I don't have anything against the author's writing. I would absolutely read something else by this author. But the sequel was like, let's just really question if the couple likes each other. Like, let's really see, are they ride or die? So to do this, let's like insert a potential other love interest to test the original couple. And once again, the original couple, I was like, I know they're ride or die. I know that they're made for each other. This new person, like, I feel like this is just not necessary. And it even had the scene where it's cold and they have to take their clothes off and snuggle up for warmth. And I was like, this doesn't need to happen. Some people, of course, are going to probably love that second book, but I honestly thought the first one could have just been a standalone and been done. Next up is one that might seem surprising that I'm even including it on this list, but I think you'll understand why. Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. I do not think that Laini Taylor had a situation where she was like, you know what, I'm gonna write this story and then maybe I'll come back to it to make money or anything like that. If you read this book and you get to the end, you know it's not over. That second book is needed. This is one of the strongest cliffhanger endings, meaning literally the story is just like, stop now. I'm just gonna stop right now, to be continued type of ending. And I don't mind that this is how the story went down, but I also almost feel like this whole book could have been part one, and then the second book could have just been part two of one really long standalone. I think a lot of people would disagree. I think a lot of people are probably pleased that it was broken up because it would have been a super long book. Otherwise, I mean, this first one is over 500 pages. I don't know how many people are interested in picking up a 1,000+ page standalone, but it could have been a standalone. Then we wouldn't have had to wait because, well, actually, I didn't really have to wait because I read this one shortly before the second one came out. But for those people that did have to wait, oh man, I can't imagine. I didn't have to wait that long, but if you read this book around when it came out and then you had to wait for the sequel, that is a painful wait. Also, if you're wondering what this book is about, it's got the most elegant, beautiful writing style. It's also a lot of nonsensical metaphors, but that's not even normally my favorite, and I really enjoyed it. But we follow a young man named Laszlo Strange who believes that this one place that is supposedly not real, he's like, it's definitely real. I swear it's real. I'm going to find out everything there is to know about it. I'm going to learn the language of this make-believe place. And then he has the opportunity to actually find out if this place is real. And then also there's another point of view, and it's from a character who's blue. And you're like, what's going on over there? So that's the setup for the story. It's really great. This next one, I agree, and also I'm sad to agree with, and also I sort of disagree with the idea that this would have been better as a standalone, and that would be the Queens Avarenthia series. So I'll start with the setup. This follows a society that primarily is in the forest and the treetops. I think it's a very well realized setting, and the setting itself feels very much like a real character because it's just so it's the way she does it, I think, is incredible. And she executes the story in a very short amount of time, which I appreciate because a lot of fantasy is really long. And we follow a character who is determined to learn as much as they can about their magic. The magic is tied to these spirits that really want to protect the forest, and to protect the forest, they want to kill humans because humans harm the forest just by existing and living within it. And to keep these spirits from going crazy and killing everybody, there is a queen who has a magical connection to these spirits, and she is able to hold them in check and keep them from slaughtering a bunch of individuals. And our main character is noticing that some of the spirits aren't being held in check, and she's thinking, okay, well, I need to learn what I can about my magic because maybe there's a chance that I will become the next queen. That's the setup for the story. Definitely really loved it. I read the whole trilogy last year. I talked about it quite a lot. I enjoyed this first one. It was an interesting decision to have it take place over a large period of the main character's life. So we see them from the time they're a small child to late teens, I would say. And it's not like we start with them little and then all of a sudden they're older. It's like we see pockets of their life. And it actually, I thought, worked. But in the second one, I really liked, we had a little shift. We started to focus a little bit more on another character while still having some characters from the first one. And I loved the second one a lot. I actually really liked the main character. She was a mother, and I feel like we don't get very many mom characters in our fantasy books. And I thought she was great, Mama Bear. And then the third one, I liked it so much until the very end, and then I was like, I don't like this ending. And then I'm like, oh, well, darn it, because I really liked the first two. So the thing I don't necessarily agree with is that I loved that second one. I don't want to not have that second one. But also, I don't know how much, I was one of those series where I'm like, ugh. I mean, the ending's not terrible. It's just really not what I wanted, which is fine. It doesn't ruin the rest of the series for me. But what if it had just been like the first one and the second one? The next one on the list would be Vicious by V.E. Schwab. I went to a book signing of V.E. Schwab's before I feel like she really blew up. It was right when the third Shades of Magic book was coming out. And from what I remember, and this would be worth looking into because maybe I'm incorrect about this, but I believe that she mentioned her intent for this story was for it to be a trilogy. But as I said before, sometimes the way the publishing industry works is that you have to sort of prove yourself with your story, and that first book needs to sell before they commit to selling others. So this first one is written in a way where it could absolutely be over after this first one. And I think if you wanted to read it as a standalone, you could. I think even for a while it was considered a standalone by a lot of people. And I was like, I'm pretty sure there's going to be more. So when the second book came out, I wasn't surprised, but I think a lot of other people were like, oh, I thought that was going to be by itself. I do think that if you're looking for standalones to pick up, you could kind of still consider this a standalone. Obviously, it's not. There is a sequel, but you're not necessarily needing to pick up the next one. There's not a bunch of threads open at the end of this. I'm actually really excited for the potential of that third one if it ever comes, because I enjoyed the second one. I actually liked the second one more than the first one, which I think is an unpopular opinion, but yeah, I mean, it could have been a standalone and just stayed a standalone. The next one on this list would be Girls of Paper and Fire. So this is a story that follows a character that is forced to marry a man that she really doesn't want to marry, and he has other brides as well. And throughout the story, the character is starting to develop feelings for one of the other girls, and also is very much trying to do everything they can to not have to engage in things they don't want to engage in with this man. It is a story that is very heavy and touches on a lot of very heavy topics, and I think the author does it with a lot of care. I'm not one to say that fantasy can't have important things in it. In fact, I think fantasy sometimes is the best opportunity to have really important conversations, because if you do it in a certain way, you're able to then use that information and kind of look at your own world with a different view, which I think is incredible, while also having dragons, that sort of thing. It's the best. I think fantasy is great for that reason. However, this is a book that I personally felt like the fantasy elements, because so many of us, when we get fantasy elements, we want them to be well fleshed out. We want them to be elaborated on. We want to see this awesome world. I think as a result, in this particular book, those things, it was like the author needed to show those things, when sometimes I'm like, I don't actually care about that stuff. Like, I kind of want to just know, how is the character doing right now? I actually think a good example of how the story could have been written would be the sci-fi book Winter's Orbit, which is a book that follows also some difficult topics. You don't really get that much elaboration on the sci-fi elements very much. Like, you're not diving into the culture of this world or anything like that. But I also don't know that you really needed to, because that wasn't the main focus of the book. And with this one, it's not that it needed to be the main focus of the book, because the author can do whatever they want, and also there are plenty of people who did enjoy the fantasy elements, but I think that the fantasy elements ended up creating a bigger story, and I don't know how much I personally wanted it to be a bigger story. I think I wanted it to be more contained, an examination of this character, an examination of this terrible thing that is occurring and the effects on the characters that has, and if we could have just spent more time with them, I think that would have been my personal preference. Anyway, that's it for some books that either I feel like maybe should have been standalones, or I can see why other people think they should be standalones, or you can read them as a standalone if you want. I'm definitely very curious, what are some books that you're like, why did this have to keep going? You should have stopped. I know there are some, like Ready Player One, I haven't read, but I know a lot of people really don't like the continuations of those. But anywho, let me know your thoughts. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you all later. Bye.